Hey, good evening. I think last night when I was doing the video, my microphone was pretty scratchy and the audio was pretty bad. My original laptop was on the fritz and was being repaired. I was using Chromebook and I didn't have the access to the good mic that I have now, and my laptop is here. And so I didn't want to do a redo of the video because it's like 2 hours long. Even though the audio is bad, it's not terrible, so you can still listen to it. And it's like an hour and 50 something minutes long. I said, I'm not going to redo it, so I might as well just leave it. Hopefully, the audio is coming in good and it's not brutal for you to listen to. The So I want to do a follow up video to it about 1993 World Trade Center bombing and the intelligence community involved with it. And I did yesterday regarding September 2001, and the intelligence community leading up to it. But I expanded on it further than I'd like to, which led to a longer discussion. Um, and so, in order to talk about this in detail, we have to go back a little bit um, to the late 1980s and New York City. Now, at that time, New York City was interested in La Cosa Nostra, which is the Italian mafia, and all their concentration and attention was attributed to a huge case called the Mafia Commission case, in which they uh, successfully prosecuted the five bosses of the five families involved with numerous amounts of crimes under the RICO Act, Racket Influence Conspiracy Act. At the time, the New York DA was Rudy Giuliani, who would later become the mayor of New York, and there was actually death threats on his life and stuff. The FBI had probably maybe 5 to 6 people working in Islamic fundamentalism or counterterrorism. At the time, there wasn't a large group of people, and there were two individuals in New York at the time, John Antisev and uh, Roy Napoli. Lou Napoli. I'm sorry, Lou Napoli, and they were working in the fundamentalist unit. Um, it wasn't until they started getting interested in the fundamentalist cells because in 1991, um, an interesting incident happened in which an individual by the name of El Said Noser, who just months prior in December of 1990 assassinated a Jewish radical by the name of Rabbi Meir Kahane, who is the founder of the Jewish Defense League, which is a right wing nationalist organization that caters to Israel just being a Jewish state alone. Um, El Said Noser at the time was an unknown to the FBI. He was just considered a radical fundamentalist, and they wanted to investigate further regarding who he was and what he was about. Um, and so what happened was when Noser was imprisoned and being charged for the murder, the FBI found out that he was going to um, have his sentence commuted, and that prior to his arrest, uh, an Egyptian imam, Egyptian radical cleric by the name of Omar Abdel Rahman, had conducted detailed surveillance of the facility, and that they discussed plans to rescue Noser from Attica State Prison, which was quite daring, if you ask me, at the time. They were going to launch a truck bomb and break him out of the walls of the cell, which is absurd. Um, but he was not convicted for the murder of Kahane, which outraged the Jewish community as a whole. And the reason why the FBI suspected was that the uh, the district attorney Rudy Giuliani, as well as the governor of New York, Cuomo, didn't want to offend Arab relations, which they were trying to repair at the heels of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, in which the Soviets basically left the country in 1989. Interestingly enough, while all this was going on, there is a woman by the name of Nancy Floyd who used to work for foreign counterintelligence, investigating foreign rings, Russian Soviets here in New York, and she got detailed to try and uncover what they could find about Arab fundamentalist cells in New York, and to do a background search of El Said Nosair and this Rahman and this group that was basically originating out of the Al Farouk Mosque, which I talked about yesterday, which was a mosque located in Brooklyn, New York, near Atlantic Avenue. Um, and so she tried to find an Arab speaker to try and become an informant to work for. And so there was this one hotel that she used to go to try and get information about Russian conscripts that were there, Russian dignitaries that were staying there. And she knew that there was this one guy that was working security at this hotel, and his name was Imad Salem. The name of the hotel was the Bergdorf Goodman. Um, I'm sorry, no, he was that was a department store that Imad Salem worked for, the Bergdorf Goodman. But Salem had basically told Nancy Floyd that he worked in the Egyptian military service, working in special ops intelligence. He actually was the driver for the president of Egypt. None of this was true. Basically, this would come out much later. He embellished his record, but he wanted to impress the New York counterterrorism unit and Nancy Floyd. So she asked Imad Salem to become an informant stationed inside the Al Farouk Mosque and get to know who this person is, Omar Abdul Rahman, and try to find out what they knew. And while this was happening, Imad Salem would report back to his handler and say that, yes, there is something that's quite interesting about this group. They're talking about terrorist operations. They're trying to release El Said Nosair from prison. He actually has a hit list involving the judge prosecuting the case, which is basically going to land him in prison for over 20 years on the gun charge, even though he got off the murder charge, which was unbelievable. His lawyer, William Kunstler, who's a known radical lawyer, uh, um, some say he's a liberal. I think he's just a radical liberal, if you ask me. But he comes from that background. Good lawyer, by the way. He's actually a legend here in New York. And so what happened was that Imad Salem had come with this really important information, which was rather new to New York. They never had this type of problem, so they didn't know how to deal with it. And so she asked Lou Napoli and John Antisev, who were working in counterterrorism, about trying to set up Imad Salem with a wire and try to record the conversations. Well, Imad Salem basically told Nancy Floyd that he wouldn't wear a wire because these guys were very security conscious and they weren't going to allow him to do that. Um, so he would visit El Said Nosair, Imad Salem, in prison at Attica. And El Said Nosair would tell Imad Salem, who's basically a courier and a close personal bodyguard of Omar Abdel Rahman at this point, winning him over because he's from Egypt and Omar Abdel Rahman is from Egypt, which basically grew the relationship closer. So Imad Salem is interviewing, I mean, not interviewing, but he's basically visiting El Said Nosair in prison. And El Said Nosair is basically telling him about terrorist plots against the West in New York, especially bombing Jewish neighborhoods. And he asked Imad Salem if he knew how to make bombs. And Imad Salem, wanting to try to web this conspiracy together and charge all these people for terroristic crimes, basically said, yes, I know how to make bombs. I worked in the intelligence unit of the Egyptian military, and I could make bombs. And so he went back after hearing the messages from El Sayed Nosei, went back to the Al Farouk Mosque and relayed the messages to Omar Abdul Rahman about wanting to bomb Jewish neighborhoods, about wanting to bomb um, uh, the Jacob Javits Center in New York, and maybe some tunnels in New York. Um, and so while this was going on, uh, Omar Abdul Rahman was basically telling Imad Slim, okay, you're in charge of building the bombs, and I'll get people to help you along with this. And basically, the people that were going to help him along with this were people like um, Nidal Ayad, Mahmoud Abalima, Mohammed Salameh, Abdul Rahman Yassin, and a lot of these people served with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1980s. These guys were fundamentalists at some point, serving under Afghan leaders like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Abdul Rasul Sayaf. So these guys had training. And not only that, there was also um, an important individual training them in small arms fires. And this guy was Ali Muhammad. Ali Muhammad, who I spoke about briefly yesterday, was basically a triple spy. He was an informant for the Central Intelligence Agency. He was also an informant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And he was also a spy for Osama bin Laden and Omar Abdul Rahman and Ayman al Swahiri. But the CIA and the FBI knew this. And even though they took the risks about having him as an informant and basically double crossing him, or at this point, triple crossing him, which is the name of the book that Peter Lance wrote regarding Ali Muhammad, which I advise you to read. It's a great book, Triple Cross. So they didn't, they had to take that into account that this guy could have been, backdooring them, and in which he was later on. Ali Muhammad was training a lot of these people at the Al Farouk Mosque about small arms fire, training them in bomb making, training them to you at gun ranges. And there's an infamous photograph that was taken by the FBI at the Calverton rifle range in Long Island, where they took pictures of Ali Muhammad and Mohammed Salameh and Nadel Ayad at the range. And you could Google it, Calverton shooting range FBI photo, and you could see it. In regards to that going on, you have the CIA who are basically at the same time funding the extension to the Al Farouk Mosque, which is the Al Khifa Refugee Center, which was basically the physical center of the Maktab al Khidmat, which I spoke briefly yesterday, which was the Afghan Services Bureau located in Peshawar, Pakistan, which was receiving foreign Arabs from all over the world to come and fight against the Soviets and the communist regime under Najibullah in Afghanistan throughout the early 90s. The Soviets still had an influence in Afghanistan, but the military was retreated out of the country. But there was still a communist influence in Afghanistan they were still fighting against. And that lasted throughout most of the 90s anyway. So a lot of these people were already under the watchful eye of the intelligence community on top of all this. Imad Salem told his handler, Nancy Floyd, that I have to make bombs for these people because they want to try and attack New York City landmarks. And so what happened was Nancy Floyd said, you can't make bombs. We're going to have to do something to uncover this. She goes, by the way, her superior is Carlos Dunbar. Carlos Dunbar tried to force the issue to push Imad Salam to wear a wire because they needed something on the record. He couldn't rely on Imad Salam's word because at this point, nothing's being recorded. There's no video evidence of anything going on. And Carlos Dunbar was jealous of Nancy Floyd's relationship with Imad Salam because at this point, this was a huge operation in New York City, with the five families now serving 100 years in the window commissions case. That basically disappeared. And some of the resources were going to the New York City Counterterrorism Office. And a lot of people were complaining about, oh, there's no radical fundamentalism here. We got to worry about La Cosa Nostra, the Italian mob, and now the Russian mob, who are basically working in Brighton Beach, New York. We got to spend money on this. But now, with the focus on the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane, the New York press got wind of it, and now there was some attention to this incident and what could be behind the scenes in regards to radical fundamentalism. Carlos Dunbar told Nancy Floyd he's got to wear a wire next time. Emad Salim said, no, I'm not wearing it. I'm not making enough money anyway from you guys. I'm only getting I think at that point it was like $500 every month. Wasn't getting much as an informant. And it was a dangerous job, nonetheless. I mean, this group in the Al Farouk Mosque, this is a murderous group. They're suspected of murdering a former imam of the Al Farouk, Mustafa Shalabi, even though nobody was convicted of that crime. It is suspected that Omar Abdul Rahman, Mahmoud Abalima were involved with the murder of this individual. It wasn't proven. So it wasn't like these guys were basically just, a bunch of hot air. These guys were the real deal. And Omar Abdul Rahman is the co-leader of an Egyptian radical fundamentalist cell located in Egypt called the Gamma Islamiyah. The Gamma Islamiyah would later, in 1997, become privy to and become the part of an operation that basically really hurt tourism in Egypt in 1997, which was called the massacre at Hattushbit, or the Giza massacre, in which I think it was like 70 people were killed by machetes. A lot of these people were Australian and Japanese married couples. And members of the Gamma Islamiyah, I think it was like 7 or 8 people involved, trapped these people in pyramids and hacked them to death with machetes and swords. And it was just a gruesome a massacre, and it got worldwide headlines. And Egypt basically cracked down on the fundamentalists, and it really hurt tourism in Egypt. And Gamma Islamiyah basically had to go underground for years, over like 10 or 12 years, and they were reviled by even terrorist groups who said that, you shouldn't have done this. Anyway, just shows you how serious these people were, Omar Abdul Rahman and the people at the Al Farouk Mosque. Emad Salim said he wouldn't wear wire. This went back to Carlos Dunbar. Carlos Dunbar said, we're pulling him out. We're pulling him out of the operation. Nancy Floyd tried to protest and said, no, we'll lose our informant. We won't know what's going on. They know they're coming up with something big. There's a terrorist operation that's going to happen. My informant proves it. And she had backup. I mean, there was other people that were backing up Nancy Floyd, saying, yes, there is information that, these guys are trying to plot something. And this goes back to what El Sayed Nosir was trying to do, to try to release himself, try to assassinate the judge, I think, which was Hardy Nickerson at the time. Not Hardy Nickerson, that's a football player. I forgot his first name. It's Nicholson, though, Judge Nicholson. Anyway, they knew these guys were trying to do something, plot something big. Emad Salim is taken off the job. Now they lose their informant. Nancy Floyd goes to Emad Salim's house, and it is reported through Peter Lance's books, through the New York Times, through interviews later on, in which Emad Salim gave, was that when Emad Salim and John Antisev called, Nancy Floyd and John Antisev called Emad Salim said, you guys didn't listen to me, and don't come calling when the bombs go off. Pretty prophetic on his part, but he knew what was going to happen. He just didn't know that what was going to happen was the target, because the ultimate target, was kept secret from him. Only one person knew of the target. So Emad Salim had to go back to the group of Al Farouk Mosque and told them that he thinks that he's being followed by the FBI, and he didn't want to bring attention to the Al Farouk Mosque and Omar Abdul Rahman. So he says, I'm going to go underground. And Rahman believed him. Members of the Al Farouk Mosque told, yeah, okay, you know, don't bring attention here, and good luck. So he goes underground. Now, what does Rahman have to do? He has to replace his bomb maker. So there was a call made to Pakistan, and according to Peter Lance's book, A Thousand Years for Revenge, a call went to Peshawar in Pakistan, and basically there was a contact, although it is disputed about who that person was. Some people said it was Abdullah Azam. Who knows who received the call from Rahman. Anyway, they get in contact with somebody, and that somebody gets into contact with somebody who's already at a training camp there. And his name was Abdul Basit Mahmoud Abdul Karim, or Abdul Basit Karim, otherwise known as Ramzi Youssef. Interesting individual Ramzi Youssef is. Um, Ramzi Youssef is born in Kuwait, and then he moved to Baluchistan, Pakistan in the mid 1980s, in which he had a relative, an uncle, who goes by the name of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was born in Baluchistan, Pakistan. Now, there's very little information about the childhood of Abdul Basit Karim, but what little is known about his profile is that we know he goes to the University of Swansea in the United Kingdom and learns electrical engineering. During the 1980s, he goes to Afghanistan and trains with the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets. The question is the name of the camp, which I'm trying to remember, and it's not a camp. It was one of the very first camps built in Pakistan, and Jihad Wall. That's right, Jihad Wall. Jihad Wall was a camp run by Abu Jafar al-Kantari, who basically taught Ramzi Youssef how to build bombs in 1988. Now, while Youssef was at the University of Swansea, he took a break, the summer break, and that's when he went to the Wal Jihad training camp and learned bomb making from Abu Jafar al-Kandari. At the same time, another individual he meets, which I spoke briefly about yesterday, and this individual goes by the name of, and again, I missed it yesterday, Ahmed Judge. I don't know why I keep forgetting his name. Ahmed Judge has an interesting background. Now, a judge is at the same training camp with them. They're both training bomb making. And according to Al Kandari, a judge was better adapting at making bombs than Youssef, even though Youssef was a pretty good bomb maker. A judge was a little bit better. A judge has an interesting background, and I'll talk about this more in depth than I did yesterday because I think this is important. Ahmed Judge, after the World Trade Center bombing, the FBI had found out that Judge was a senior Intifada activist working in the occupied territories, who worked closely with Al Fatah. Al Fatah was basically a group created by Abu Nidal, which was a splinter group from the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is a really violent group. According to federal sources, the Israeli National Police expelled a judge from Jordan in April of 1991 for conspiring to smuggle weapons to Al Fatah from the West Bank. And later on, a judge would claim in court papers that after his arrest, he was tortured by Israeli soldiers who burned his body. Now, there's a history behind this. I'm going to tell you about it. According to the Kol Harar, which is basically a Jewish weekly publication sold in Jerusalem, and it's a highly regarded Hebrew weekly magazine, a judge was never involved with Intifada activities, or with the PLO, or with Hamas. Now, this is coming from which they cite court papers and other sources, that a judge was not even a political activist. He was actually a small time crook who was arrested in 1988 for counterfeiting US dollars with two or three other people in a counterfeiting ring, which ran a small, like, makeshift printing press located in this Arab cemetery in East Jerusalem, where in this cemetery where they will wash the bodies, because Muslims would wash the bodies before burying them. But the Israelis arrested him. They broke down this operation, and they found like $100,000 of U.S. currency on him, all bogus currency anyway. And he was also one of the affiliates with him was carrying this very antiquated pistol, this old pistol on him. Shows you how bumbling these crooks were, right? So a judge was convicted of counterfeiting, and he was sentenced to 3 years. And while he was in this Israeli prison, the Mossad actually visits him in prison and apparently gave him a compromise. You can work with us as an informant against Hezbollah and Hamas, or you could stay here and run out your sentence, in which he was being abused and tortured there. And so he agreed to infiltrate these groups. So this one person who didn't have any type of religious fundamentalist background is now playing the part of a religious fundamentalist. This is a problem, as you can see, right? I mean, here, according to a Jewish publication, which is citing court court orders, public sources, and papers about a judge being a Mossad informant. Now, let's jump to Peshawar, Pakistan. A judge and Yusuf are making bombs. The call comes in. Rahman needs a bomb maker. Al-Kandari relays the message and says that you need to go to New York. They need you over there. Doesn't tell him what's it about. So he takes a judge with him, and they have to get passports. And considering that, they don't have valid passports, they make these makeshift passports. Now, what happens is that on September 1st of 1992, Yusuf and a judge actually land at JFK, where they go through customs inspection agents. Yusuf has this Iraqi passport, crudely made, and he tells him he wants to apply for asylum. The prison system is overloaded. The court system for refugees is overloaded. The detention cell is overloaded with these refugees. So they put him on the side and they interview him. Ahmed, a judge, is actually traveling on a Swedish passport, which is even worsely made, and has this photograph, which basically comes off with cheaply made glue. And it's not even his passport. It's a passport that I think he stole. And then he gets arrested for traveling on a fake passport. And he's carrying this luggage, hand luggage. And what do they find? They discover bomb making instructions, bomb making materials, just a whole slew of incriminating evidence, including this document that said Al Qaeda on it, incidentally enough. And we're talking 1991 here. Al Qaeda was just starting to become uh, a larger organization. They started in 1987 as a training camp called Al Masada. If you haven't heard the audio yesterday, I talked about this, how Al Qaeda started. I won't go into it today. Anyway, all this incriminating evidence, and so they hold on to it. This guy's what the hell is this guy trying to do? So to Yusuf's incredulity, because the prison system and the refugee tank where refugees are being held is so overloaded, they let Yusuf walk and say, "Here's a date. You have to come back and go to court in Brooklyn court to hear to talk about your immigration status, your hearing." He walks outside the airport and he gets a cab ride, which basically conveniently was a Pakistani, and he said that he doesn't have cab fare or nothing, and he needs to go to Al Farouk Mosque. And the cab driver gives him a free ride, and he drops him off at the Al Farouk Mosque. Stunning turn of events for Yusuf, actually. Um, it is actually fascinating when you think about it, like all these conveniences that happen upon this one guy. So Yusuf goes to the mosque and he finds out that the target, which wasn't the Jacob Javits, which wasn't Jewish neighborhoods, it was actually the World Trade Center. And this was only known to El Said Nosser and Omar Abdul Rahman. Rahman then tells this Ramzi Youssef, and only him and Youssef know about this. Even though there's a couple of other people that help Youssef in building the bomb, which was a giant, like urea nitrate bomb filled in these canisters, multiple canisters, that was being built in um, a storage container in New Jersey, where he was ordering fertilizer, ordering urea nitrate, ordering the fuses, the connections. All this was being made with him, Nadel Ayad, Yassin. Meanwhile, Mohammed Salameh was the driver. He was a terrible driver. In fact, he got into an accident with Yusuf in the car, and Yusuf had to go to the hospital. Where'd they get this idiot from, right? So after a while, the bomb is built. And I think it took like a month, 2 months to be built. Nobody knows about the operation up until this point, only Rahman and Yusuf. Up until the day itself. Now, the bomb is being loaded into a Ryder truck in which it was rented by Mohammed Salameh. Mohammed Salameh is actually renting an apartment in New Jersey at this time. This would come back later. I'll talk about how important this is. It actually is one of the most important pieces of information regarding this operation. They get the bomber to the truck, and the truck goes into the level B of the garage of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The date is February 26th, 1993. Now, inside the Ryder truck, there are a number of containers filled with fertilizer and urea nitrate. And it's not a timing bomb, it's a fuse bomb. And Yusuf orders a long fuse, really long fuse, and he lights it. And so behind the Ryder truck is the escape car. Now, Mohammed Salameh is not the driver. It's Mahmoud Amalima. In the car is Yassin, Salameh, somebody else. But Yusuf actually lights the fuse. However, in the car, which is in the garage, there's a traffic jam, and they can't get out into the street where they could get out of the World Trade Center. Meanwhile, the fuse is lit, Everyone's like getting nervous because they're there for a couple of minutes. Luckily for them, the fuse is long. Yusuf is not sweating. Yusuf doesn't care if he's a martyr or not. This is the type of guy that's willing to die for his, cause. After a while, the traffic relents, the car gets away, and about like 5 minutes later, the bomb explodes, and it's a huge explosion. Um, there's a crater that goes like I want to say it was like three garage floors that were basically destroyed. I mean, there's multiple garage floors underneath the World Trade Center. I think it's like five or six floors below the World Trade Center. It created a whole like four, I want to say 4 or 5 levels deep. It was huge. I mean, it was huge bomb explosion. And it was the biggest bomb that ever went off since the bomb that blew up these, which I found out recently from DJ Thermal Detonator, a bombing of the stock exchange, Wall Street Stock Exchange, which was a huge bombing at the time. That happened in like 1920 something. It just, huge bombing anyway. But this was a huge bombing at the time. Uh, and so it knocked the power out of the North Tower. 6 people ended up dying. And all 6 of these people were actually basically employees for the World Trade Center that was having lunch inside this office, which was a concrete office. And what happened to them was the shockwave was so great that the walls caved in on them. Some of the people basically disintegrated with the shockwave, but there was one woman, this Hispanic woman, who basically was crushed underneath the weight of the concrete, and she was pregnant actually, and she was killed underneath the concrete. They found a body, and yeah, it was a terrible scene. Unbelievably, only 6 people were killed, and I think it was like 1,000 people were injured. Most of them for smoke inhalation, and the smoke went up all the way up to like the 80th floor. So there was, pretty extensive damage, caused a lot of damage anyway. However, Yusuf gets away. He then calls into numerous publications. I think one of them was the New York Post, the New York Times, saying that it was the result of the bombing was the Palestinian Liberation Group, some fictitious group, you know. But he was disappointed because what he wanted to do was to bomb the North Tower, in that the tower itself, here's the south, this is the north. What he wanted to do was bomb the base, in which it would collapse sideways, lose its structure. And so the tower would lean into the South Tower. The South Tower would then collapse into Lower Manhattan. And he approximated 50,000 people would die this way. He probably would come close. Lower Manhattan housed the stock exchange, financial district, garment district. Yeah, it would have caused a lot of damage, especially at midday. But it was snowing that day. There was a slight snowstorm. It was cold. Not many people would have been in the streets. Probably would have been anyway. Regarding midday, I think it would have been anyway. But the damage would have been incomprehensible. Probably would have been worse than 9/11 if you think about it. Imagine the World Trade Centers collapsing into Lower Manhattan. Yeah, that would have been something else. But it didn't. It actually, the structural integrity was compromised, but not to the point that it would lose its base and structure where the tower would collapse. He miscalculated. And the FBI would later do a diagnostics check and said that if Yusuf had basically just driven 50 yards to the right of where he was, he would have compromised the core structures of holding the World Trade Center, and then it would have collapsed. He also said that if he had enough money, he would have made the bomb bigger. He didn't get much money from making the bomb. Some of the money was actually come from the donations of the Al Farouk Mosque and also from donations abroad. In fact, there was a $600 check that was mailed from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in Pakistan to Mohammed Salameh. That's how the FBI found out about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in the early 90s. Okay, The bombing happens. Yusuf gets away. What happens here? Well, according to the FBI, they go back to Imad Salem and tells him, listen, now we got to take you seriously. You were right. We were wrong. And so now Imad Salem has the upper hand, and he wants more money to be involved with the infiltration of the Al Farouk Mosque. And he agrees to $1 million. Now, here was a guy who was making $500 a month. Now he gets $1 million. Why? Because now the entire world wants, well, the entire United States, especially the Southern District of New York and the FBI headquarters in Washington, all now want to know what the hell was going on. Who are these people? Here's the second terrorist attack upon the United States, with the first one being the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane. That's technically the first terrorist attack inside the United States by radical Arab fundamentalists. Don't forget that. That's actually considered the first time. But the FBI was really ill-equipped to investigate the matter. And so now they're trying to pour in money to the counterterrorism unit. They're trying to get help from the New York Joint Terrorism Task Force, who knows really nothing about, Arab fundamentalism. The Joint Terrorism Task Force was headed by John Antisev and Lou Napoli. They were, of course, trying to involve themselves with Nancy Floyd and Imad Salem, trying to help them, trying to put wires on him. And now they're like, we need to get this guy back because who knows what they're going to plot next. Imad Salem actually goes back and is now an informant again for the FBI at the Al Farouk Mosque. The FBI investigates the terrorist bombing and finds out that after the bombing, they find the axle, miraculously, the axle of the Ryder truck, which was carrying the bomb. And on the axle was a VIN number of the truck. What a find. What an incredible find. So they find out that the truck was rented in Brooklyn, New York. And they find out that it was rented by Mohammed Salame. Mohammed Salame basically goes back to the Ryder truck agency where he rented the truck and tried to get his security deposit back because he called in and said the truck was stolen. You would think this guy would hightail it out of here, out of the country, after what just happened. He goes back for his security deposit, which was $300. Basically just $300. I think it was like $300. Incredibly, the FBI, basically, before he goes back, they find out that he has the application there. They find out it goes to this specific spot, and they set up a sting there, the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force. So they're all just waiting for this guy to come back. He comes back. The guy behind the desk is actually an agent from the FBI, and he's like playing the part of like haggling with Mohammed Salame about getting the security deposit back. So all the agents are outside in trucks, hidden in trucks and cars, and they're like laughing because, and they're pissed off because they just want this guy to come out and arrest him. And he's like haggling about the price of the security deposit. So Salame says, "Yeah, all right, I'll take $200." It's when you think about it, this is really absurd. I mean, just insane. So he gets $200 and he comes outside and he's like immediately arrested, right? So they find out that not only did Yusuf rent this truck, which was used in the bombing, they found out on the application he gave a phone number and an address to where he was staying, which was basically a New Jersey apartment that was rented and owned by a woman by the name of Josie Hadass. Why is this important? You come to find out, the FBI finds out that Josie Hadass is a Mossad intelligence officer. What a coincidence. Inside the apartment of Josie Hadass, where Mohammed Salameh was staying, a slew of incriminating evidence was found, including wires, bomb making materials, fuses, powders, bomb making manuals, all left behind conveniently in this apartment. Wow, talk about a slam dunk case, right? Here it is. Arab fundamentalists built this bomb. They attacked the World Trade Center. We need to open up a bigger investigation, and millions of dollars needs to be poured in to a new counterterrorism unit in New York. Well, I wish it was easily explained as that. When the FBI tried to do a further investigation of Josie Hadass, conveniently, she's no longer in New York. The FBI would later come out and say, and I always forget this agent, and DJ Thermal Detonator always reminds me of the FBI agent's name, and I always tend to forget it because I'm 51 and I'm older now and I can't remember things, so I forget names. So don't hold me to it. But the FBI agent would later say in a media interview that even if I knew who this person was, I still wouldn't tell you. What? Why not? How long was this person staying with Mohammed Salameh? How long did they know about Salameh's apartment and what he was about to do? I mean, it just can't be. I mean, if we throw caution into the wind and we want to, rely on speculation, this is remarkable regarding the timing, the convenience of having Israeli intelligence who are closely monitoring an Arab fundamentalist cell or members of it being involved in a terrorist plot. Now, I just outlined the events of September 11, 2001 in yesterday's video, in which Israeli intelligence were closely living next to Arab fundamentalists involving in a terrorist plot. So the FBI basically arrests Salameh, later Mahmoud Abalima, who's caught in Egypt. He's actually arrested by Egyptian authorities. He's tortured, and he's renditioned back to New York. That leads to the questioning of Abdul Yassin. Yassin is actually interviewed by the FBI. And while they're interviewing him, they notice that he has acid burns on his pants in the garbage outside his house. They ask him, what's that about? They interview him and they talk to him. And he says, well, yes, we were involved in a terrorist operation, a bomb making operation. What? You were involved with the bombing itself? Hey, we would like to talk with you further. But first, we'll let you go home. You can't make this stuff up. Right? Here's a guy who basically says, I'm involved with the largest terrorist plot in New York City's history. Yeah, I was involved with it. Yeah, I knew Ramzi Youssef. I knew Mohammed Salameh. I know who Omar Abdul Rahman is. Oh, since you're being very open with us, we'll trust you. Hey, could you come back in tomorrow for a second interview? I'm sorry to laugh, but it's just like this is comical. And what I'm telling you is not, something made up. you could Wikipedia this. This actually happened. And this is the FBI we're talking about. He basically leaves the country the next day. That same night, I think he gets on a plane and he goes to, I think it was first, he goes to, I want to say it's Lebanon or he goes to Iraq or something like that. But he's actually arrested in Iraq, but they don't deport him. He's actually there. Uh, this is unbelievable, right? I just, Keystone Cops. Incredible enough, but it just shows to show you that, you have the CIA who's involved with monitoring the Al Khifa Refugee Center, which is right next door to the Al Farouk Mosque for years, even at one point um, funding the Mujahideen through Operation Cyclone, which had a trickle down effect into the mosque itself and into the refugee center, which was basically an extension of the Afghan Services Bureau in Pakistan, and which was being run at the time by Osama bin Laden and Ayman al Zawahiri when Azam dies. You had the FBI who were monitoring the Al Farouk Mosque, even having an informant in it, not just one, but two, with Imad Salam and Ali Muhammad, who's also a spy for the CIA, and Osama bin Laden. And now you have the FBI investigating El Said Nosser and his connections with maybe older Arab fundamentalist groups, such as the Abu Nidal organization, and to the Al Farouk Mosque and these Afghan nationals and fundamentalists at the Al Farouk Mosque, at Masjid al Salam in New Jersey Mosque. And of course, Omar Abdul Rahman, the Egyptian radical cleric of Gamma Islamiyah, in which the CIA allowed into the country, even though he's on a terrorist watch list. They gave him his U.S. visa in Cairo, Egypt in 1990. It's not like these guys slipped under the radar, is what I'm trying to tell you. It's not like these guys basically surprised the intelligence services, foreign or domestic. They knew these people were here. They monitored these people. They knew what they were going to do. I'll use that as speculation. All right. I can't really prove that they knew what they were going to do, but they knew something was going to happen. Yusuf actually gets arrested in Peshawar in Pakistan in 1995. He actually is renditioned back to New York, and he's currently serving a 240-year sentence at Supermax in Colorado. He's actually in a very select unit in Colorado Supermax called Bombers Row. He's there with Ted Kaczynski and Terry Nichols, who was involved with the Oklahoma Mirror City bombing in 1996. I think that was 96. However, does the story end there? Well, the FBI likes to think so, because after the trial in which they found all these people guilty, the FBI said there is no large fundamentalist cell in the United States. It's over. There's no evidence of this. And so the media basically shut the case and said, yeah, it's over with. But one New York counterterrorism agent doesn't seem to think so. His name is Frank Pellegrino. He happens to think that there's a much bigger operation inside the United States. There's a fireman by the name of Ronald Bucca who worked in the Manhattan fire ladder, I think 71. Don't hold me to the number. But he's actually injured and he's on retirement, forced retirement. And he opens up his own investigation into this fundamentalist cell on his own, a fireman. How is it that one FBI agent and a fireman are the only people who actually believed that there was a bigger fundamentalist cell inside the United States, and the intelligence agencies don't realize it. Or do they, and they don't want to acknowledge it? That could be a possibility. I can't say that with any type of certainty. Ali Muhammad would actually still give information to the FBI. In fact, later on in 1997, he actually has a dinner with Dan Coleman of the FBI unit in New York, as well as, I'm sorry, Jack Clunan of the FBI in New York, and Patrick Fitzgerald, who's an attorney based in New York and Chicago. And he tells them that not only is there a large network here in the United States that travels across many cities, but that there's a sleeper cell inside the United States that's willing to bomb high value targets. And he walks out of the dinner, and Patrick Fitzgerald turns around and tells Jack Clunan, "That's the most dangerous man I ever heard in my life. Why aren't we investigating this guy?" Not knowing that he's an informant for the FBI and the CIA. Well, the following year, Ali Muhammad gets arrested, and he's arrested for having connections with the 1998 East Africa bombings. At the same time, the CIA is actually monitoring Osama bin Laden in the Sudan, as well as in Afghanistan. And all this was basically not shared with the FBI, most of it anyway. The FBI still doesn't know who Osama bin Laden is at this time. They just think he's a financier. They don't know anything about him. One day in 1997, they actually asked the CIA, "Hey, do you have any files on this Osama bin Laden guy?" Because at this time, there's an informant from Al Qaeda named Jamal Al Fadl, who actually becomes an informant because, as a money courier for Al Qaeda, he actually is a gambler and he spends $100,000. He wastes it and he doesn't want to go back because bin Laden is actually going to kill him. And he becomes an informant for the FBI. And he's the first Al Qaeda informant ever. And he breaks down the organization. The organization is much bigger than they realize. And the FBI basically asks the CIA, "Hey, do you have any files on this Osama bin Laden guy? We never heard of him. We just know he's, a financier in the Afghan Mujahideen war." What did the CIA give the FBI? 2 handcarts of files. Large, thick files. So that means that the CIA not only knew who bin Laden was, they knew him even when he was in Afghanistan fighting the Mujahideen. That's 10 years prior. And 15 years prior to the bombing of the attacks of the United States on September 11, 2001. And like I said yesterday, the NSA was actually monitoring bin Laden's satellite phone from 1992 to 1998. So again, like I said, it's not like the intelligence services, were caught off guard and said, "Wow, who are these guys? We need to, start monitoring." They knew what these people were about, and they were monitoring for a very long time. Now, what did they know, and how long did they know it? That's the question. And that's the question we need to ask. We need to start asking the right questions and not the wrong questions. Like, no hijackers, or no hijacked planes, or that Osama bin Laden is a patsy. He's a CIA agent named Tim Osman, or that the FBI helped build the bomb, which built the World Trade Center. No, let me tell you something about that too. Because after the World Trade Center bombing, Imad Salem goes back and visits El Sayed Nosair again in Attica prison. In the follow-up of the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, he visits El Sayed Nosair again in 1993. What does El Sayed Nosair tell Imad Salem, who at this time is wearing a wire? Because he's back as an informant for the FBI in New York. El Sayed Nosair tells him to bomb Jewish neighborhoods, the George Washington Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, FBI headquarters at Jacob Javits, the United Nations building. Now, this operation would be known as the Landmarks Plot, in which not one bomb was being built, multiple bombs were being built. However, the FBI knew about this program because Emad Salem actually got this on tape and he gives it to the FBI. And the FBI says, we're going to rent a warehouse in Jamaica, Queens, and we want this to be the base of where you're building the bombs. And so Emad Salem gets everybody from the Al Farouk Mosque, and we're not talking about the people who helped build the bomb for the World Trade Center bombing. Now, there were other people like Sadiq Ali and like 12 other people who would help build multiple bombs that were being built by Emad Salem and, tentatively built by Emad Salem, not really built by him, as well as members of the mosque. And these were like powder bombs, easy to make. And the FBI went into the warehouse one night and replaced the blasting caps and the powder for fake bombs for a fake powder and a fake blasting cap. Emad Salem heard about this from the FBI, from his handler, Nancy Floyd, and said, no, they're going to find out that the powder is fake, the blasting cap is fake. Go back and put the real ones on. Because, I'm not going to go back and get myself killed here because they'll find out that something's going on here. And so they do. And that's why it's always mixed up between, the FBI built the bomb, which was used in the World Trade Center. No, nobody built that bomb. That bomb was built by Ramzi Youssef, and it was a urea nitrate bomb. And they were going, and the FBI actually tried to get involved with that too, but they couldn't. And so the bombs, as they were being built, when they were near completion, the FBI raids the warehouse and arrests everybody. And they get everybody on camera because there's cameras in the warehouse, there's bugs in the warehouse. They got these guys dead to rights. Or do they? According to Emad Salem is the one who, by the way, he's an informant. He's the one who selected the targets, who he says is coming from El Said Nosair. He has a conversation with Sadiq Ali, and Sadiq Ali says, and this is recorded, what targets should we attack? El Said Nosair says we should attack such and such and such and such. That's what we call entrapment. If he was a law enforcement official, even though he's not, he's still an informant for a law enforcement agency. During one meeting with Omar Abdul Rahman, Emad Salem is holding a briefcase. In the briefcase is a recording device. And he's having a conversation with Rahman in Arabic. And since Omar Abdul Rahman is blind, he whispers something to Emad Salem's ear. As he's whispering in his ear, the briefcase goes up so he can record what Rahman is saying. And Rahman is allegedly saying, make sure you attack a U.S. Army base. That's how they got the connection to Rahman and the Landmarks case. And after that trial was over, Rahman was basically in prison for the rest of his life. And so were members involved with the Landmarks plot. The story really doesn't end there. I mean, I could go on, but I kept it at the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and I involved the Landmarks plot. So I won't go and deviate any further. But I'm just trying to show you the connections with domestic and foreign intelligence that were monitoring these people, even sometimes even living amongst them. And who knows what they knew? Who knows how long they knew it? The thing is, they knew. They knew what was going to happen We just know, we just have to know the details of what they knew and how long they knew about it. And those are the questions we have to be asking as independent investigators. And like I told you yesterday at the end of the video, I'm not nobody special. You guys that follow this channel, I want you to become more educated so that you become the purveyors of information and the teachers and the leaders, and you educate other people about this specific matter, which is so important because it's the lead up to the 9/11 attacks. Um, and so that's it for now. I will end the stream, and thanks for coming on. See you next time in the live stream.